everyone, it's Katie from Paradise Falls family. In this video, we'll be going into a little bit more detail on our day ashore at Icy Strait Point on our Alaskan cruise on the Disney Wonder in August 2024. In particular, the whale watching and bear viewing excursions we enjoyed here. We've already given a summary of our cruise in separate vlogs, which you can find in our Alaska playlist, and our day in Icy Strait Point was the first of 3 shore days in the middle of our cruise. In this video, I'll talk through how we spent our time in port, but I'll also give a bit of an overview of the port for those of you who haven't visited yet, mention some of the other things that you can do with your time, and along the way give some tips and information that will hopefully help you make the most of your day. So to start off with some background, Icy Strait Point, alongside Juneau, is the furthest north the ship goes on this cruise, but it still sits right in the bottom corner of the vast state of Alaska. The cruise destination of Icy Strait Point is right next to the small town of Hoonah, which used to be a fishing town and cannery, but it's now primarily just a cruise stop destination. The town itself is just down the road from the cruise port, and there are buses to the town, but having driven through, it is very small, with only around 800 people, so not much for a casual tourist to see. The port and town are on Chichagof Island, a massive area of wilderness, which we were told is home to around 3,500 bears versus the 800 people that actually live here. So you never go out and about in the surrounding area without protection. As a result, you'll spend most of your time in and around the port area or on arranged excursions, and Disney offer a wide range of things which I'll talk through later. Having weighed up all of the options, we decided to book a whale watching excursion in the morning with free time to explore the port in the afternoon. We later decided to also add in a bear excursion in the afternoon, which Greg went on and he really enjoyed. The port area itself actually has 2 docks, the Ocean Landing and the Wilderness Landing. The Ocean Landing, in our opinion, is the better one, as it's possible to walk to the majority of attractions from this dock. However, there's also a short cable car connecting the 2 landings, which is free, so you can travel between the 2 areas really easily. There's also walking paths connecting the 2 areas, but there are a lot of bears in the area, so this was closed for most of the day when we visited due to bear sightings. Then there's a second cable car from the Wilderness Landing going up the mountain, but this one isn't free and costs around $50 per adult, although you often get a free pass if you've booked on an excursion, as we did. It was good to get this free, and we don't feel it would be very good value if we'd had to pay for it ourselves. From the top here, you can walk the trails, get something to eat, or even zip line back down to the bottom of the mountain. As I mentioned, the main attractions are centred around the Ocean Landing side, where there's the Adventure Centre where you can book on some last minute excursions, and the Duck Point Smokehouse restaurant and some shops. You can wander along the shore just a couple of minutes to the cannery, which has been converted into a museum, shops and the Crab House restaurant. It's a lovely relaxed area that's really easy to explore, and you can come and go from the ship all day. The actual ashore time was 7:15 AM and all aboard not until 8 PM, meaning that you had a really nice long day to take your time, enjoy some excursions and explore the port. As I said, we'd booked onto the whale watching excursion for the morning to leave us free for the rest of the day. The excursion was called the Whale and Marine Mammals Cruise, and we booked on for 8:45 AM. It lasted approximately 2.5 hours, and it was billed as one of Alaska's best whale watching sites, so sounded promising, and cost $229 per adult and $149 per child. After a quick room service breakfast to save time, we met in the theatre at the start of the excursion, and then once everyone was ready, we were walked off the ship and straight onto the boat, which was right next to the dock. From here, we spent around 2 hours out on the water searching for wildlife. The water was lovely and calm, with us being in a sheltered bay the whole trip, and none of us had any seasickness problems, which is a real novelty for us, as Finley and I especially get really seasick really easily. The boat itself was lovely and spacious, with 2 decks and plenty of seats by large windows. Both decks had an outdoor area so you could get outside and see the wildlife. We were on the top deck, which had plenty of room outside and gave us great views. There were also restrooms and a small bar downstairs for snacks and drinks. The weather was pretty overcast and a bit drizzly, so we made sure to wear plenty of layers and waterproofs, and we could duck inside whenever we wanted. Our first sighting was of some sea otters and sea lions. The otters were playing in the kelp and the sea lions chilling out on a buoy. I'd say for maybe the first hour we were still within sight of our cruise ship, but then we turned into a bay, and this is where we finally saw some whales. We saw around 3 or 4 on the trip, all humpback whales, and all were sleeping. This meant they basically looked like floating logs, but you could still see them moving around a little bit and the occasional spout. Obviously, a lot of whale watching comes down to luck, with how many you find and how active they are. Unfortunately, on this day, we just weren't that lucky, and we'd heard of lots of other trips where they saw lots of whales, very active and breaching, whereas I think we just timed it badly. Nevertheless, it was still really cool to see. The scenery was wonderful and it was a lovely trip out. We did also spot a seal, a couple of eagles, and we were looking for some bears on the beaches, but didn't see any this time. We were a little bit disappointed that we hadn't seen more activity and hadn't seen any orcas, but this couldn't be helped. We later learned that humpback whales are resident here at this time of year, whereas orcas are commonly seen but are transient, so aren't here all of the time. So don't get your hopes up too much for seeing orcas. Back at the ship, it wasn't yet midday, so we decided to explore the port area before we went back onto the cruise ship for lunch. If you walk across the gangway from the ship, you go straight into the Adventure Centre. This is basically a large building where you can book on and meet for excursions, and there's a shop and some restrooms. Outside of here, there's a little fire pit where you can roast marshmallows and make s'mores, so we had a couple to keep us going. Then we hopped on the cable car to the Wilderness Landing and on up the mountain. There was no queue at all, and it was really quick to hop across and up the mountain. We just had to show our excursion wristbands to get onto this cable car for free. Unfortunately, on the day that we visited, it was very overcast and foggy, so we couldn't see a lot on the way up or down. This was a shame, as we've seen other vlogs where the view is spectacular, but it couldn't be helped. At the top there wasn't a lot going on, with it being pretty dreary weather, so we had a quick look in the shop and then headed back down. We would have liked to have done the zip line really, but the kids weren't quite heavy enough to ride it, and with the weather being as it was probably for the best. By now, we were getting pretty hungry, so we decided to head back to the ship for some lunch in cabanas. The kids and I wanted to spend the rest of the day relaxing on the cruise ship, and Greg had his bear excursion at 2:15, so there was just enough time to get something to eat before he headed off again. The excursion departed from the Adventure Centre, so Greg met the guide there. It was called the Spasski River Valley Wildlife and Bear Search and lasted for 2.5 hours. It was $169 per adult and $99 for kids aged 8 and up. We did ask the kids if they wanted to do this excursion, but they said no, as I think they were just a bit tired of looking for bears and not seeing any, so they just wanted to enjoy time on the ship instead. Greg was desperate to see a bear, so I stayed with the kids while he went off on his adventure. The tour itself only had 12 people, although often there are apparently around double this number. There's a minimum of 10 people required for the tour to operate, so he was lucky that there was just enough for it to go ahead. The group was driven in a minibus through the town of Hoonah, with a mini tour along the way and out into the forest. This takes around 35 minutes, and then you have just over an hour out here by the river before you're picked up again for the journey back. There were 2 guides on the trip, plus a third with live ammunition. As I mentioned, there are thousands of bears on the island, so it's important to stay safe. These are coastal brown bears, so they're a bit like grizzly bears but get bigger due to the amount of salmon available for them to eat. The hill beside the river apparently had 200 bear days on it over the last winter, so you really are in bear country. The drive out to the forest is lovely and scenic. It felt like proper Alaska, and you do cross a small bridge where you can try and spot bears on the way. The group slowed right down to look for bears, and a few people did catch a glimpse of one down in the river. On the way back we had much more luck spotting one massive bear right in the middle of the river catching salmon. There was another group nearby parked on the bridge who'd seen 5 or 6 bears down in the river, so there are lots around. So having been dropped off, there's a single portaloo but otherwise no restrooms, so keep that in mind. Then there's maybe a 5-minute walk from the road down to the river. The group were given a safety briefing and were told that provided they stayed together in a group, it was very unlikely they'd run into any issues with the bears, so Greg never felt unsafe at all. And kids do frequently go on this trip. It was maybe a minute or so walk through the forest before you come out into a clearing and a wooden boardwalk across a boggy area, which took another 2 or 3 more minutes. Then the other side of the clearing, it's maybe another minute or so walk through the forest to the river, where there are 3 raised wooden viewing platforms connected by a path for people to safely view the bears down at the river. The group were really well taken care of too, with an armed guard checking the trails before the group used them to make sure that they were clear and safe. For the first few minutes, there was maybe just a brief glimpse of one bear off in the distance, and lots of splashing in the river from the salmon. Eventually though, a large bear cub appeared down in the long grass by the river, catching salmon. The mother bear wasn't anywhere to be seen, but the bear was about the size of a person, so maybe in its first year out on its own. The group were able to watch the bear and follow along the viewing platforms for a good 30 to 45 minutes, and Greg got some amazing pictures from a safe distance. He also spotted a couple of eagles too. It was a really amazing experience and he was absolutely buzzing when he came back. It was a shame we hadn't experienced it too, but the kids had enjoyed their chill time and it's something we'd love to do again if we ever come back. It's certainly something we'd recommend and it was one of Greg's highlights of the whole trip. Afterwards, the bus dropped the group off by the cannery at the far end of the port area, so Greg was also able to explore this area a little. It's a lovely walk back to the ship from here, along the coast by some of the little cottages. Apparently you can sometimes see whales and orcas from the shore here. Greg did see a porpoise and lots of salmon splashing around, but no whales. Back on the ship, it was still only around 5 p.m, so we were just in time for our dinner in Tiana's place. I think we were pleasantly surprised by Icy Strait Point. Out of the 3 stops, it was probably the one we were least excited about, simply because we'd read it was mainly a cruise port rather than a major town itself. However, we had a brilliant day here and found there to be plenty to do and experience, so we'd really say make the most of your day and you'll have a fantastic time here. Because this is primarily a cruise port destination, most of the activities are booked through Disney themselves. We struggled to find many things we could pre-book ourselves through Viator, for example. And as you can't really explore outside of the port area without an excursion, it means to take part in anything, you're probably going to be booking an excursion through your cruise line. Fortunately, there are loads of options, but make sure to budget, as of course this all adds up. I've already mentioned the whale watching and bear excursions. These can actually be booked as a combo together or with other activities, which is worth considering to save a little. The other one we really fancied was the zip line, or zip rider as it's called. We really enjoyed zip lining last summer in Hawaii, so wanted to try it again. However, our kids didn't quite meet the weight requirements, so we couldn't take part this time, which was a shame. This was also a fairly expensive excursion too, and it was $200 per person. Then you've got the Adventure Park and Ropes course, which takes place around the port area and looked like a lot of fun. But we had other similar activities booked elsewhere on this trip, so decided to give this a miss. There's other activities out on the water like kayaking and fishing, or you can get out in the wilderness on an ATV, a Jeep adventure, or the mountaintop forest tram. There's really something for everyone, so make sure to plan ahead and get booked onto the one that you want before it fills up. These can be booked anywhere between 123 days and 75 days before sailing, depending on your Castaway Club level. And as long as they haven't sold out, you can book onto them all the way up to the day of the port, which is great if you want to be more flexible with your plans. So hopefully that's given you a good overview of Icy Strait Point and how to make the most out of your day and some of the things you can get up to. Next week we'll move on to looking at our time in Juneau, which was our second stop of the cruise. If you like this video, please give it a like and make sure to subscribe to the channel to catch this, and it really does make a big difference. In the meantime, if you've got any questions or any other tips, then please let us know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching.